Pace leaders next year, you guys won't need to listen to this harangue again, but they'll be able to see it on video. So let me welcome all of you to the 2023 training for the LA Marathon and the Rose Bowl half. And it begins today. Of all the days I really, really wanted to be there, it was today. And of course, who got sick? I mean, really sick. It took me 3 hours just to sit down with clothing on, and but that's the way things go, I guess. At any rate, let me share my screen. And if you guys have any questions at any time, please let me know, and we'll answer them as we go.
And welcome. I'm so glad to see you guys here. Some of you, it's the first time I'm meeting you in person, and some of you, it's like we go way back. And so I'm just really glad to have everyone here. With that, I leave it to David. I'm going to let him share his screen.
Here we go. I know all of you have seen some of this. Some of you have seen all of this. I apologize for redoing some of the information. I hope that all of you can learn a little something. There are a bunch of slides I'm just going to zip through because I know you guys know some of this stuff. And if you don't, we can talk privately about it later, whatever. At any rate, here we go. As always, thank you guys for so much that you do. I was a PACE leader years ago, and I know how important you guys are to this program. As a matter of fact, the person who theorized and started the PACE leader program many, many years ago, suddenly, because of the PACE leaders, the program grew like exponentially overnight. And so you guys have no idea how important you are for this program. I gave this lecture about over a 5-year period, and for some reason my slides are not changing. Okay. Anyway, I gave this lecture over a 5-year period with the Inland Empire, and afterwards, their group grew from about 150 members to about over 500 members in that 5 year. And they did a survey and they told me about it. A bunch of them ran up to me at Mountains to Beach a few months after the LA Marathon one year after I had done these lectures. And they said one of the big things that people that grew their group, yes, it was more social media and all that, but it was also that their PACE leaders seemed to be very knowledgeable. And I'm trying to stay as close to my mic as I can. So, and this was the lecture that I gave them so many years ago for a 5-year period. So that's where we're at today. So I've always liked to start my lectures with, people say I'm not an athlete. Well, Bill Bowerman, who invented the Nike shoe at the University of Oregon, always used to say, quote, if you have a body, you are an athlete. So all your people, I don't care if they're walkers or sub 3-hour runners, we are athletes, all of us. And we all have potential to. This is me, well, for whatever that's worth. And oddly enough, I haven't updated it with LA Roadrunners on here. But anyway, that's me, what the heck. So let's dive right into it. And here we go. The first section is really just physiology. We'll get into a little about neurology much later, and also training. What are the training principles? Why do we do what we do? And all of that. So here we go. It's the book I wrote. Whoops. Good. So what is ATP? It's written right down here. Anyone? Shout it out. I can see you, by the way, on the little screen down here. What is ATP? Anybody?
Adenosine triphosphate.
There you go. Triphosphate. Tri obviously is 3. Phosphate is 3 phosphate molecules. And basically, I think you can see me now, you have these little submicroscopic filaments called sarcomeres that are, if I had 6 fingers, that's what this would look like. They're tiny, tiny. You have billions of these that make up the muscle. And they basically expand and contract. But these are actin filaments. They're beads, single beads of protein molecules, which is why when you're done with your run or walk, you need to take in protein because you're rebuilding muscle tissue, which is all protein basically. Inside you have myosin filament with little heads on it, myosin heads that click on these little beads of protein molecules. And it's like a little ratchet system. But I mean, billions and billions of these things. And adenosine triphosphate is essentially the fuel that our bodies use to move, to allow that myosin head to release from the actin filaments. So in other words, that little ratchet will drop with an explosion and the muscle will release, right? So that explosion is 3 molecules of phosphate. One breaks away from the other 2, and an electron fires out, and that causes that myosin head to release, and the whole muscle, that sarcomere, will expand. Got it? Most of the fuel you eat, carbohydrate and fats, go into this single silly process. If you had clear or opaque skin, you would virtually glow in the dark because, yes, you are a nuclear reactor. You are. You are breaking phosphate molecules, and that's a nuclear reaction. So let's go back to our little screen here. And so that's the fuel your body uses. Now, if there was any takeaway from today's lecture that you can get, this is the key. One thing, and that's that we train for different energy resources that make up ATP, adenosine triphosphate. That's what all of our training is about. It's not about building more mileage. Building more mileage gives us more time at different energy levels to generate a more efficient physiology and neurology to go farther faster, right? So, but you need to train slow, you need to train fast. That it has nothing to do with just running alone. That's kind of a waste of time. So we do need to focus on low heart rate as well as high heart rate to train these different physiological energy resources. And I'm going to get into that much deeper in a moment. So there are 3 resources, or what we call substrates for ATP, that your body essentially uses to make ATP. Creatine phosphate, glycogen, and fat. We'll get into this a little. Your creatine phosphate is generating ATP in what we call a phosphagen system. Fat and glycogen go through the Krebs cycle, and we'll get into that a little bit more. You really don't need to know creatine phosphate. That's for sprinters. You only have 7 seconds of creatine phosphate, and I'm just going to zip through those slides. So forget that. You really need, we are not sprinters, we are not football players. We need more than 7 seconds of resource for energy. Creatine phosphate, you only get 7 seconds. Glycogen, probably about 90 minutes. Fat, probably like 2 marathons worth. The skinniest Kenyan can probably run 2 marathons if they just kind of walk it using only fat. When you hit the wall, it's basically because your glycogen levels are really low and you're now just primarily using fat. So your body is like, I just can't run. I can't do this anymore. I'm not in pain. I'm not suffering. I just suddenly, boom, I've run out of energy. I don't know what. That's when you're running low on glycogen. Your body will just shut you down. So, creatine phosphate, we're going to skip this. We're not sprinters. We're not worried about the final kick, 7 seconds in a marathon. Glycogen. Glycogen, like I say, is higher heart rate. You're talking more about 5K, 10K. When you're doing that pace, you're primarily using only glycogen. And like I said at the bottom, when you run out of glycogen, you kind of hit the wall, you bonk, you know, whatever you want to call it. And like I said, you have only about 80, 90 minutes of it. Fat, use at lower heart rates, and these are critical. Fat we use at more aerobic levels. Right now you're using glycogen and fat even just sitting there. And we're all at low heart rate, but you do use some glycogen. It's that you're not depleting your glycogen at all. You still have blood sugar, you know, carbohydrate becomes blood sugar, blood glucose, whatever you want to call it. And blood glucose, blood sugar becomes glycogen. Glycogen is a little like white honey-like substance that reside in the muscle, and you basically use that. It's like fuel injected. It's right in the muscle, ready to go. So when that lion is attacking you, you're gone. You're just racing. You're high heart rate. That fuel is ready to go. It's also what makes meat taste good. We add honey to ham because we're just adding more sugar. Glycogen is sugar. It's, you know, like honey. Anyway, I know that's a sick reference, but I'm delirious and sick, so who knows what's going to come out today. Fat, you train primarily at lower heart rates as opposed to glycogen, higher heart rates, I already said. Glycogen, you stop utilizing fat at a certain level that we call anaerobic. Fat, you need oxygen to metabolize fat. So aerobic, meaning kind of with oxygen. So aerobic with oxygen, you need oxygen to metabolize fat. So we call it aerobic when we're primarily using fat. You're always using a little glycogen. And we call when you're no longer, your heart rate is so high that you're no longer using fat, we call that anaerobic, meaning without oxygen, because that's essentially what's happening. If you're really, really pushing yourself at the end of a 5K or a 10K, you may find that you're actually inhaling like one step and exhaling two steps, because you really don't need to take in that much oxygen. What you're exhaling is waste product gases like nitrogen and hydrogen and all of those CO2, all those waste product gases that you're developing from running at such a high heart rate. We'll discuss that later. So those are primarily the two resources that your body uses, and we need to train and really focus. So training at marathon race pace can often be a waste of time, especially on a long run, because as we all know from a marathon, your heart rate is going higher and higher and higher and higher and higher and higher as you go farther and farther and farther. And if you don't start at a low enough heart rate in training, as you get farther and farther into your run, your heart rate is no longer aerobic. You're just wasting your time. You're out there, you know, if you ever got to the end of a run thinking, oh my God, thank God that run is over with, you've just spent a big chunk of that run wasting your time because you're not developing what we call endurance, which is developing that aerobic fat burning system at low heart rate. You want to be able to talk fluidly without pausing to breathe. You want to, what we call conversational pace, where you're talking to people like I am now, not taking in breathing, not talking with pausing for breathing like I'm doing now. Enough said. So those are the critical elements of training that we really, really need to focus on. And it has nothing whatsoever to do with marathon race pace. It has to do with low heart rate and higher heart rate. And the higher heart rate is short and fast, midweek, and the long and slow is always the weekend. So, as your heart rate goes higher, you use more glycogen and less fat. And as your heart rate goes lower, you use less glycogen and more fat. Pretty simple. That's what it's all about. Use up all your glycogen, and your body will force you to slow down. And that's what we're seeing. You know, we used to have this huge 350-foot vertical drop at the end of the LA Marathon in Santa Monica. And I cannot tell you, on this big decline, how many people were walking down that because they went up the hills early in the marathon too fast. So it's not even, the marathon is not about race pace. The marathon is more about power output. The marathon is about heart rate. That's really how you pace yourself. You really need to slow it down early on those big uphills. There's a lecture online I think a lot of you have seen with me talking about the LA Marathon at an hour length. But at any rate, so that's what we're doing is, you know, we're doing the extremes. That's what's training where you really have the greatest benefit. I always refer to pace as a 4-letter word. And, you know, unfortunately, in the past, when I was a pace leader for 9 years, everything was about pace. Everything was about marathon race pace, and it has become a big chunk of our culture. And that was one of the reasons early on I wanted to get us away from that. That's why we so often did Amalfi, is because I wanted you guys to understand, forget pace. You know, if you did, you know, even your easy pace going up Amalfi, you'll kill yourselves. Run walkers. It's okay to walk. You know, it's okay to like turn off the watch and say, I'm going to do this easy because that's where I have the greatest benefits. That's where I build my aerobic system to be the strongest. That's where I build endurance. Endurance is basically building your aerobic engine, utilizing fat more efficiently because we have way more fat than glycogen. Got the picture? So you want to build your endurance. You want to build that energy resource that is way bigger than glycogen. And the way to raise the bar and still use fat, so you can go farther using fat, is speed work, but that's the short and fast midweek. So, okay, enough of that. We've already discussed this. Aerobic, what we call endurance, what we call aerobic building. There are 3 things that you gain physiologically, specific things that you don't gain from higher heart rate. And these are what we call in building, these are the tools that we develop for building endurance. One are we gain more capillary veins and arteries to get nutrients in and out of the muscle faster and waste product out of the muscle faster. We build more mitochondria. Remember that this system right here, mitochondria are where our Krebs cycle comes from. Mitochondria take fat and glycogen. Mitochondria reside inside every cell of your body, and they take fat and glycogen and they turn it into ATP. That's where this Krebs cycle takes place in mitochondria, and you develop more of them only from low heart rate. So this is critical. So more capillary veins and arteries, more mitochondria, and also more oxidative enzymes that your body generates to turn fat into fuel. These are fat into ATP. These are critical elements on why, when we say easy pace, it really, really, really needs to be easy pace, not like, look, we're almost at marathon race pace. It has nothing to do with that. That might be a psychological benefit, maybe, but there's no physiological benefit to that whatsoever. So, anaerobic. Like I said before, you want to raise the bar on where you're still using fat, run fast. You want to raise your heart rate. You can raise your HR max, your VO2 max. I won't explain those. You can create new brain cells from running fast. What I mean, excuse me, I don't just mean running fast. Walkers are the same as us runners. Walkers have heart rates, they have physiology that are identical to the rest of us. When walkers generate higher heart rate, they develop that anaerobic system. When they walk at low heart rate, they develop that aerobic system. It's identical to runners. They're just walking. It's just different mechanics. That's all it is. Okay. So, I apologize if I refer to just runners. That's not what I mean. It's all human beings on the planet. So there we go. Okay, so enough of anaerobic. Speed work raises your anaerobic threshold, the point where you stop using fat as fuel. That's above that heart rate is anaerobic, where you're no longer using fat. So anyway, okay. We're going to just dive through this one. We already covered all that. Here is a blood lactate test. Now, can you see my cursor on the screen? I think you can. Yes? Somebody?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay. Good. This line up here is heart rate. These numbers are indicative of heart rate from this person. This line down here is lactic acid output. Remember, those from aerobic work, that low heart rate, easy work, you develop more capillary veins and arteries. You actually get rid of lactic acid more quickly, and lactic acid goes back into the muscle through the liver, and it is hydrogen is emitted from lactate, and lactate, wow, becomes glycogen.
Yay!
So your body actually recycles waste into fuel that your body can use at higher heart rate. I don't know why, but I find that fascinating, that we recycle garbage, lactic acid. So you'll note 1.53 at 114 heart rate, you're going up about 6 points of heart rate, but you're only going up 0.05 of lactic acid output. 5/1000ths. That's like nothing. Now, you go up 10 to 30 beats heart rate. Now you're going up a little more. It's 0.12. So figure you're going up 0.1 more than this 0.5. You've just doubled almost. It's still pretty low. Then you start going up and up and up, and you look at here, 155 to 60, you suddenly jump from 4.5 to 7 in just increase in 5 beats of heart rate. So now you're skyrocketing waste product. Got it? And that's what happens. That's what happens when you start going really, really high heart rate. They claim that they theorize. They don't really know, but they theorize that lactate may have been designed to help tire you out. They really don't know what the point of lactate is. But at any rate, you can see clearly how things get tougher and tougher and tougher the higher your heart rate goes, right? You probably knew that intuitively, but the thing that I want to point out is down here, all of you sitting there have something beginners do not have, And this is something to be aware of. Because I remember one time hearing somebody who was really an advanced runner say, oh, just suck it up, to somebody who is a total beginner. And I want to show you the next slide, but before I do, note on this slide, right in here, this is what we call an aerobic base. Excuse me, an aerobic base, not anaerobic, but an aerobic base. Got it? Where you're still aerobic and you're really not going up much. You know, pro athletes will actually, at some point in this aerobic base, if they had enough testing, for enough points of testing, you'd actually see their lactate go down. So their stress levels would actually go down during this aerobic base. And that's what we call our zone. You heard this term, I'm in the zone? That's what it is. It's when you're going at a certain pace, really a certain heart rate, there's nothing to do with pace, and your lactate output, your stress output actually goes down during that aerobic base. And that's what we call being in the zone, which all of you have probably felt. But beginners won't have that aerobic base yet, so they'll have no clue what you're talking about. This is an experienced athlete. Let's take a look at a non-experienced athlete. Remember the base. This is lactic acid output. This is heart rate. Here's now look at, oops, all right, here's aerobic, I forgot. Here's lactate threshold. Now, lactate threshold is where you're starting to build up more lactic acid than you're depleting. You know, when you're running at true aerobic levels, you're not building up lactic acid, you're creating lactic acid, but because of the capillary veins and arteries, you're getting rid of it faster than you're building it up. Now at lactate threshold, a little above marathon race pace, you're now building up more and more and more. A little above marathon race pace. At this point, lactate threshold, you probably have about 80, 90 minutes before you hit the wall at lactate threshold. Now, anaerobic threshold, you're now talking about you're no longer even using fat as a resource for fuel when you're aerobic. You're now anaerobic, AC. Your old schedules used to use terms like aerobic, LT, AC, although LT used to be used for marathon race pace. It's kind of ballpark, maybe a little above, but okay. And then there are other terms that we humans create, like AC would be anaerobic conditioning, where you're using like interval training would be anaerobic conditioning. Repetition pace would be anaerobic, I guess. Threshold work is a prime example of aerobic conditioning, this AC, this heart rate range in here. And AT, of course, you're anaerobic, you're no longer utilizing fat at all. You're just depleting glycogen very quickly, and good luck. But we can all run a 5K mostly at anaerobic threshold. We start out at low heart rates at the start line. But, okay, now remember this aerobic, how big that aerobic base is. Here's a beginner. Look at this. Look at this. They're skyrocketing already. Remember, it was like 0.05 milliliters of lactate output. Now look at this. They're going up 1.4. Forget 0.05. They're going up in just a few beats of heart rate. They're going up 1.4 1.4 in like 12 beats of heart rate. They're just skyrocketing. They have no aerobic base whatsoever. Now, I'll tell you something crazy. Some of you already know this one. Both of these, here they are, both of these were created by the same person 1 day apart. Now you're wondering, how could that be? You know, this one is a beginner on the left, this one is an advanced. How is that possible at all that they could be done by the same person? This was the same a day, and this was the same time of day a day later, 24 hours later. How did they suddenly become this uber experienced athlete versus a totally inexperienced athlete? Well, I will tell you something, and that's that. Let me hang on. I know the person who did this testing, and I love this guy. He is probably the most impressive, amazing human being I have ever encountered on the planet, ever. And, okay, it was me. It's my lactate threshold. But anyway, that was my joke for the day. I guess when you're delirious, it's not as funny. But,
David.
but,
Good grief.
this was the one on the left was me on a bike. I was not a big cyclist back then, and the one on the right was me as a runner a day later. And so you can clearly see the lactate, your lactate threshold output is completely different between different regimens of exercise. Biking over here, running over here. This was done on a trainer on a bike, hooked up to a computer. This was done on a treadmill, hooked up to a computer. So that's basically sucks. That's all I can say. Good. Let's get back into it. I know a few of you are still sitting down, but you can hear me. So let's dive back into it. Now, we've already discussed lactic acid, that it goes through your liver and recycles into glycogen, and your capillary veins and arteries aid to this, which is a big part of that aerobic, easy-paced process. And so we're going to ignore this slide. Here's a trick question. What mile do you hit the wall at?
Sorry, again.
What mile do you hit the wall at?
Oh, I know.
Anyone want to answer that?
18. Wait.
I know.
What?
You don't have to hit the mile.
18.
When you run out of
18?
glycogen.
Run out of glycogen.
Right? What mile is that?
20.
Okay, I have 18, I have 20. Well, let me tell you something of interest. The average person, keep in mind, bigger people can absorb more calories, smaller people absorb less calories, bigger people use more calories, smaller people use less calories, but the average person can consume about 2,000 calories. The average person uses about 100 calories per mile. Do the math. Unless you're going too fast, the average person will use up most of their calories by mile 20, unless you're taking in something a little bit in terms of calories. We do absorb a lot of fat, like I said. The thinnest Kenyan can go about 2 marathons or so, just walking using low heart rate. But you basically do need to take in calories during your race. If you don't, mile 18:20. If you're going too fast, it'll be mile 18. If you're taking those hills early on, it'll be mile 16, 18. But you'll start getting hungry unless you take something in at mile 20, because your body can only absorb so many calories, and you're consuming so many calories. So the real question is if you're taking in enough calories in the form of carbohydrate, why do you even have to hit the wall? Why is it that pro athletes can run the whole marathon? And why is it our walkers can walk the whole marathon? I've seen Lindsay, she's been exhausted, and Kathy and Sarah and all you guys. I don't care how tired you are, you're still walking at a pretty brisk pace. And our runners, Min and Philip and Eric, you guys are still running at a pretty brisk pace. I don't see you guys burning out at the end of a marathon. And I'll bet all of you are taking in some form of carbohydrate to keep going. And that is critical because of those reasons. We consume a lot of calories during the course of a marathon. So, here's neurology. We're getting through this pretty quick. I'm very pleased. I'll take questions and answers as soon as we get through this. I apologize I'm so close to my camera so I can be close to the microphone. But we all have, I'm hoping you're getting some element of new knowledge from some of this, all of you. But we all have neurologically, we all have fast twitch muscle fibers, which help us run quickly. These are defined by thicker muscles. You'll note that Kenyans all have thin legs. They are distance runners, where Jamaicans have thicker legs. They are sprinters. They have more fast twitch muscle fibers. If you see somebody with thick legs, they are sprinters. They have the capacity because they have more fast twitch muscle fibers. And there was a woman I told this to, and who had really, she looked like a sprinter. She's very thin, except she had thicker legs. And I said, you are blessed with a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers. And she suddenly thought, oh my God, I'm so cool. And her whole life, she just thought she had fat legs or something, which is not at all the case. So that's fast twitch versus slow twitch. You need slow twitch muscle fibers in order to take you through that easy, slow pace. And here's the problem. A lot of the beginners will not be able to go slow enough because those about over half the muscles in your body are dormant. You know how just before a marathon you're starving? It's because you've engaged more muscles and you need to feed them. You need to eat more and more and more and more. It's not just because you're doing more and more energy. Yes, that's absolutely true. More and more volume and using more and more energy. Yes, that's true. But you need to eat more also because you're using a broader spectrum of muscles. Fast twitch, slow twitch. And in between, we call fast oxidative glycolytic muscle fibers. You can train those to go faster or slower. So that's why Kenyans can run really, really fast, even though they don't have a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers. They do have a lot of fast oxidative glycolytic muscle fibers where they've trained them to go faster. But they will never be sprinters. Got it? That's a key. I have two granddaughters, and one has very skinny legs, one has very thick legs, and it's very clear one could be a great sprinter, one could be a great distance, cross-country runner. So there you go. You'll know Philip's kids who are training on the national level all have thin legs. And they're doing amazing things on the national level. Congratulations, Philip, with your kids. He's coaching them. They may never be sprinters, but they'll be amazing in endurance. His daughter and son finished the Rose Bowl half marathon in, what was it, like 1:20 or some ridiculous time? Philip, what was the
We were in the 140s.
140s? All right.
They were pacing it. They weren't racing it.
And they were like 12 and 13
Yeah.
years old. Yeah, got it. So anyway, they're amazing. But that's the problem. Here's how you can't go slow enough, and you may hear this from people in your pace group. I can't go this slow. So they'll go to a faster group, and they won't be slow enough to really build that aerobic base as efficiently as they could be, because they haven't recruited those dormant, slow twitch muscles to get them to go slow enough. I know that sounds crazy, but it's a great reality. Whoops. I'm going to skip that one. So you might want to tell them, if they want to go slow enough, which they need to be able to do, it will benefit them. And let's face it, the more muscle fibers you engage, the stronger you are. It's like having more people to push a car out of a ditch. The more muscles you engage, the stronger you are. More fast twitch, more slow twitch that you recruit from your dormant muscles, over half of them are dormant, the stronger you are. So if you can get them to walk, you could even put them in a run-walk group for a couple weeks. But really, even on their own, midweek, get them to walk for a few seconds and then slowly start to run and pick up their pace to what they're capable of going slow at, which will probably be too fast. But if they go for like 5-second walk and then slowly speed up their pace, they will be engaging, or recruiting, I should say. You recruit dormant muscles, you engage muscles that are just, asleep because you've been sleeping, or you've been sitting in a chair. You know how you get up and you start to engage muscles. But those have already been recruited. They're muscles that are ready to fire. They're just not firing for the moment. So, at any rate, that's how you can get them to recruit dormant, slow twitch muscle fibers to enable them to be comfortable at that low, easy pace, which they really need. They really, really need. If there's any problem that you guys have, it's slowing them down to build that endurance, that aerobic base, that fat burning efficiency. Got it? What I used to do in the past as a pace leader is I would run up and down like the third man over, which I know I shouldn't have done. You're supposed to stay in twos or whatever. But I would go up and down the row, and I would say really, really stupid things to everybody. Like, hey, how you doing? And they'd say, oh, okay. And you'd hear them talking. And if you hear them talking like, yeah, I'm okay, I feel great, you know they need to go to a slower group. If they say, yeah, I'm doing great, you know they're good. And then the next person, it's a great day out here, isn't it? And they'd say, yeah, it's a great day. You know they need to go to a slower group. And then I'd say something stupid like, it's great to be out by the ocean, isn't it? The stupidest things that whatever came out of my head, I would say to the next person on the row. And it may have sounded like a positive affirmation, but really what I wanted to do is listen to how they were talking to me. And, like 90% of the people were in the right group. But occasionally, you will find people just from the breathing test. And this is something that the pace leader is running in the back of the group that day. Hopefully you're all trading off front and back. But the person who's running in the back of the pace group that day Hopefully they will do this and trade off. How you doing? Oh, all right. What a nice day. Yeah, it is, isn't it? Whatever comes in your head, just strike up a conversation with them and go up and down the ranks and listen to their breathing. Obviously, if you hear someone breathing out loud, they're not in the right group. Almost all of our run walks on Saturdays are building that endurance, easy pace, endurance base, aerobic base. Same thing, aerobic endurance base, whatever you want to call it. Conversational pace. I don't care if we're going up a hill. If we're going up Amalfi, we still want you to be comfortable and easy, especially you run walkers. Give up the watch. I've always said, for run walkers, your watch on a hill is trying to kill you. It hates you. It wants to beat you up. It wants you to run when you should need to be walking. So remember that, run walkers. We're going to forget training principles. We're going to get over that. You do need 8 to 9 hours of sleep. You benefit from that. I am reminded the woman who won gold for the first time in the United States history, whose name suddenly escapes me, just a few years ago in the Rio Olympics, she claimed that what put her over the top to win gold in the U.S. team in the Olympics in the sport of triathlon, which is a big thing for me. I'm also a level 2 triathlon coach with USA Triathlon, was 9 hours of sleep a night. We rebuild the most muscle tissue, those little sarcomeres. We rebuild the most muscle tissue during the first hour of sleep. And she claimed we rebuild most of our hormone levels during sleep, which help us rebuild muscles and help give us energy for training and all of that. She claimed 9 hours of sleep is what put her over the top to win gold. So forget 6 hours. I heard a lecture by a coach. He said that if you don't get 6 hours of sleep with his training program, you're not allowed to train. That was like the only rule he had. You needed to get over 6 hours of sleep or forget it. You're not allowed to show up. I'm obviously not that, critical, but if you can get 9 hours, good. Obviously this whole slide has to do with, how many hours a day do we have to train? One of the problems we have with our LA Roadrunner training program, and I'm still struggling with these schedules because it's a fine line between giving you guys too much midweek and too little midweek. I'm reminded Bob Larson, Meb Kovlesky's coach, for his whole life since college, always said, I've met him a couple times. He lives in Brentwood. He was the head coach for UCLA for many years. He's always said Meb never had a long run. I know you gasp in horror. We build to a 20-miler. That's the critical. Meb never had a 20-miler. Oh my God. How did he win marathons? Well, what it was, it's all about volume. And what Meb did was he did 140 miles a week. But he did AM, PM, running in the morning, running in the evening, and it really added up to 140 miles a week. Now, if I gave any one of you 140 miles in a week because you don't create as many hormones as a guy like Meb Kovlesky, you'd probably be injured. I am going to create an 80-mile training program for our new Group 0. And Group 1 is going to have a 60-mile training program. Obviously, you guys can pick and choose the training program, the schedule that you want to be on. All the Saturdays are pretty much the same, except Groups 1 through 4 start out with way more mileage, and then everybody kind of catches up to Groups 1 through 4. But the point being It has nothing to do, once again, with going farther. You know, the Hanson brothers in Michigan only build up to 16 miles. The longest run that Neb ever did was 16 miles, according to his coach. And the only reason he went that far, according to his coach, is he just liked long runs. He just liked being out there and doing it. And he didn't like to have to stop. Otherwise, he would have liked Dina Castor, the longest run she ever really did, more or less, according to her coach, who I had lunch with once many, many years ago, a guy named Joe Vigil, who has also worked with Bob Larson in creating the Mammoth Lakes Track Club, who our former LA Roadrunner coach, Dina Castor's husband, whose first name escapes me, his last name, Andrew Castor, thank you. He kind of got his coaching stripes with the LA Roadrunners. He is now the head coach of the Mammoth Lakes Track Club, where Dina and Meb and all those guys used to train. And now the new up-and-comers, a lot of them are Mammoth Lakes. So we have a lot to do with Mammoth Lakes Track Club. And they are also sponsored by ASICS. But at any rate, a little bit of history. So it's not about the single long run. If I could just give you guys more, the best schedules I ever created for anybody where they really had a PR were they ran in the morning, they ran in the evening, they ran in the morning, they ran in the evening all week long or every other day, morning, evening, whatever. And that's where people had a PR. It had nothing whatsoever to do with a long run. It had nothing whatsoever to do with a long run on the weekend. Got it? The best schedules I ever created, the longest run they ever did was 16 miles, which I still do. I just created a schedule for my USA Marathon training. The longest run was 16 miles. Traditionally, they have a 60 to 70% PR rate. And most of those people were with me for about 5 to 10 years. We're about half that with the LA Roadrunners, I think. So, unfortunately, I think our schedules are not as efficient as they could be. And this is something for us to consider for the future. And I'm like banging my head against the wall every time I create a new schedule because I know this. And I see all the algorithms and they're just not adding up to what I want. But at any rate, wait to see our new schedules. I added a bunch of new algorithms. So that's that. Your rate of achievement is only defined or achieved during recovery, which we're going to discuss next. You build with intensity, you build with stress levels, doing more, and then during periods of recovery, that's where you achieve the benefits. The mitochondria, the capillary veins and arteries, stronger muscles, more slow twitch, fast twitch, whatever. That's where you gain the benefits to exercise, is during periods of recovery. That's why we have taper weeks. You do need taper weeks, which we're going to discuss in the next couple slides, in order to rebuild hormone levels and to gain the benefits of that training. We'll get into that in a minute. As you do more and more and more, there are diminishing returns. For you who are like, just at a PR, and maybe you're at 80% of your maximum ability level, you're not going to gain anywhere near as much if you go to 100% of your ability level. You're not going to gain anywhere near as much as somebody who's a beginner. I mean, look at this. They're skyrocketing. I did not create this graph. I think I know. I got this from Jack Daniels, a PhD in exercise physiology. I took this from his book, and I reproduced it for my book. But at any rate, they're just skyrocketing in ability. The couch potato, the 0 to 40% is going to gain enormously. Like I showed you earlier, they're going to gain that aerobic base that they didn't have before. So for a long period, even though their heart rate is going up and up and up, they're going to feel comfortable at an easy pace, where the beginner won't. So the unfortunate thing is as you get higher and higher and higher, you also accelerate setbacks, meaning injury. Setbacks meaning injury. So the more you do, the greater the risk of injury. I've always said that if you're not injured, you haven't done enough. And if you are injured, you've done way, way too much. So there really is that fine line. Really listen to your body. Have your athletes listen to your body. If they're starting to feel aches and pains, make sure they back off a little. Make sure that you figure out, or we figure out, what's going on that they're feeling this ache and pain, that we can stretch or foam roll or whatever. Point I forgot to make is these sarcomeres when they break, they can get all kind of knotted up, and the foam roller straightens them out. That's the genius of the foam roller, is that they're much stronger when they're straight, and you get that from foam rolling. I heard an analogy that if you have a bunch of straws and they're bent, and a bunch of straws together and they're bent, they'll just all break. There's no strength. But if you have a bunch of straws and they're all straight together, you can push down with a hell of a lot of force when they're straight, and they won't bend, right? Like 20 straws together. Try it sometime. It's the same thing with your sarcomere, those billions of little tiny filaments that make up your muscles. That's what foam rollers do. You still benefit from stretching because it stretches out the titin, these little rubber bands. They're not rubber, they're protein, but these little rubber bands that actually, when the myosin heads are released, these little rubber bands pull the actin filaments apart. So you do benefit from stretching those titin, those little spring-like stretching devices, so they'll stretch even further. Because otherwise your muscles get tighter and tighter and tighter and less able to pull apart. That's what stretching does. That's what foam rolling does. They're rather different things. Incidentally, and I learned this from Michael Herrera, our physical therapist, that you can't stretch out your IT band, because your IT band, the pain on the side of your knee, your band that runs from your hip, your IT band can take like 1,000 pounds of pressure, and foam rolling the side of your leg won't help anything. But at any rate, we're going to zip through this. I'll say really quick, a guy named Joe Friel from Triathlon World created basically, here, I'll go to the next one. The idea of training as a triangle. And basically, at the top, oddly, is endurance, which is the biggest part of us. And then down here would be force, which we might consider like running faster for us. And speed skills would be like if you're, running form, right? Working on speed skills. And then in between, muscular endurance would be like threshold runs, where you're building endurance and you're raising the bar, threshold runs. So you're using force and you're using endurance. And this is just a visual of how to think of training. We're getting into training now. And anaerobic endurance would be like where you're really recruiting faster muscles, maybe even fast twitch muscles, or training those fast oxidative, the kind of middle muscle, to go faster. where you're doing repetition pace, where you're doing interval pace, where you're going a lot faster. And that would be, where you're really recruiting faster muscles between endurance, the endurance being the slow stuff, and speed skills. So that's just really fast. And then power in between force and speed skills. Now you're sprinting. You're doing 100-meter, 50-meter repeats. And, honestly, that's not really something that we do. If there are people, I heard Ryan Hall would do like 100-meter repeats one day at the end of his workout, just because he wanted to get faster for the end of his marathon. If he had to beat somebody on a sprint, he wanted to do some power workouts. So at any rate, this is just, I thought, an interesting way of visualizing training as a triangle. Endurance, force, speed skills. Speed skills, a better way of thinking speed skill would be if you were a golfer, speed skills, or a swimmer, speed skills would be the mechanics. The swinging of the golf club, the angle, the positioning of your hand and your arm to get a catch on that water with your forearm. I won't go into that. But that would be a greater example of speed skills. And running form would be a good example for us. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting for you guys. Hopefully that helps. We just had a break about... so let's jump into the next thing. We're really talking about training now. Throughout our season, like right now, we Lucy puts out all these wonderful newsletters, and she deserves so much more credit than what she gets. I think because I'm standing there, I get a lot of credit that I don't deserve. That really should go to her. And I know I've said this in the past, and it's really true. I'm okay with that. But, she puts out these newsletters, and the most recent one basically was talking about right now you need to do strength training and aerobic work to build that base, to rebuild strength training. And then continue a lot of that into the next season. But this graph is a picture of early season. You have general training. It starts here, just more general training. And as the season progresses, you have less and less general training, meaning like you'll swim, bike, run, play tennis, strength train. As the season progresses, maybe you'll drop the tennis games. As the season progresses, you'll stop swimming. I think swimming for me, because I'm really twisting, swimming is a great way to stretch your hips. I'm not recommending it unless you have good mechanics for a swimmer. But the general training, you want to maintain some strength training, but the general training diminishes and the specific training increases. You'll note specific training would be marathon race pace. As the season progresses, we do more marathon race pace. We don't do all of it, but not all of our runs do not become marathon race pace ever. But I do want you to get the feel of marathon race pace on flat ground. If you're getting marathon race pace on an uphill or a downhill, that's meaningless because you won't get the real feel of it. That's why for a mile and extended to 2 miles, when we're on flat ground on the strand, on the beach, that's why you do marathon race pace, is to get the feel of that. And that's more later in the season. So early season, general training. Later in the season, it gets more and more specific. That's a kind of good example of how to do that. I did not, again, create that graph. I've stolen mercilessly all of these graphs. And I know this line here is, we're going to get into weeks of training. This is just a general graph. The dotted line is volume of aerobic work. And it's a little different on our schedule, but volume of aerobic work tends to taper out before anything else. And high intensity, this dots right here, the bottom line, tends to increase in volume until a little later. But everything drops to a final taper. And you notice this line is fitness. Even though our workload, these lines, aerobic and anaerobic work, even the high heart rate, the low heart rate and the high heart rate work plummet to almost zero before, actually the 2 days before the marathon really does plummet to zero. Then we have this little kicker before the day of the race. And there are indications that that will increase your ability level on marathon race day. 0.05%, which is really nothing. But if you could get 0.05% increase from every workout you do, that little kicker, the 10-minute, 15-minute, the day before the race at marathon race pace, hey, why not? Your fitness levels still increase. You're getting stronger and stronger, even during massive periods of final taper. Okay? Now we're going to get into interval tapers and why we do that as well. The question is, why do you race pace? Why do you do marathon race pace? And what is it if the whole point of the season is building fitness? Building the ability to go faster. So how do you know what marathon race pace is for you at the end of the season when you're starting out at the beginning of the season? You don't really. But you do know where you are at easy levels, conversational pace, aerobic levels, same thing. And you do know where you are at anaerobic levels, just listening or breathing, listening to their breathing. You really want to help guide them by listening to their breathing and talking to them. That's a critical point for you pace leaders. One thing that I'm going to need your help with is the first meetup, and it really is just a meetup. We're going to have the pace leaders on September the 17th, the week after the Santa Monica Classic. We're going to need everybody, even any ambassador who's there. We'd love to have your help. If you're at one of our training camps, either in LA or Orange County. Keep in mind, we are starting a new Orange County group on Sundays. And if anybody asks about Orange County, keep in mind, if you want to do LA and Santa Monica and Orange County both, you and all your athletes are welcome to do both. So you're welcome at both, and we hope that you come down to Orange County to increase our numbers there. But I think that's kind of a cool thing about having a Saturday and Sunday run. It's a bit of a drive if you live out in the valley to go to Orange County. I totally get it. I'm not expecting any of you to show up, but except Colette maybe. But and I know Kent is and Andrew and a couple of others are thinking of coming down quite often because you live down there. But and that'd be great. But all your athletes and all of you are welcome to Orange County. But the week when we first meet up in Santa Monica at the Totem Pole, we're not really there for training. We're there to hand out more T-shirts. I'm not sure if we're going to be handing out T-shirts at the Santa Monica Classic or not. I think we've kind of decided on both not doing it and doing it at different points, handing out T-shirts. But at any rate, we will definitely be handing out more T-shirts the first week. So I'll need your help handing out T-shirts. But more importantly, I'm going to need your help, all of you pace leaders. I know we love to talk and chat. I'm one of you. I do too. but I'm going to need all of you to help answer questions and get people into the right group, the right training group. And the way I have found the best way to do this is, hopefully all of you have the VDOT app. If you don't have it, you can go online to any app store. I got it on my cell phone. You can I strongly suggest you put it on your cell phone. There may be beginners that have no data whatsoever. They have no races they have done recently. But here's the VDOT app. I don't know if you can really even see this. Whoops. But, yeah, I don't know if you can really see this. It's this little tiny icon right there, that VDOT icon right there. But at any rate, hopefully all of you can put this on your cell phone and play around with it before you get there on September the 17th. That's Saturday. And then again on Sunday, we'll do the same thing. I am going to have new signs for everybody. All PACE groups will have a sign for training every week. And please, PACE leaders, come over to the picnic table. Pick up your group sign. They will be different from our marathon signs, which are in my storage. I still have most of them. Some got broken up. I'll need to replace. But the signs are going to have your easy pace, your marathon race pace, your marathon finish time. I don't even know if I'm going to put marathon race pace on them, but each of you will have one of those signs on one of those sticks. And before we launch each of your groups, I will take the sign. There's no reason, unless you want to run with it. There is zero reason to run with any of these signs, but they will enable people to look around and see what group is best for them. And then you can answer questions. If you see someone looking at your sign, talk to them. Say, are you looking for a group? What is your ability level? Have the VDOT app ready. And your VDOT app will calculate, well, here, let's get into it really, really quick. I'm actually a little ahead of game here. I'm really pleased. I apologize. Whoops. Hang on a sec. Oh, whoops. Okay. Here we go. Good. So, the VDOT app, basically on your schedules, you'll note right down here, easy pace is a range that's created by, I typed in a point 27.0 VDOT. If you type in 12 minute per mile marathon race pace, you'll get 27.0 VDOT. Your easy pace is 11:57 to 13:05. On your schedules, on that leftmost corner, that leftmost columns, you'll see below the easy range a 12:30 for this particular VDOT. And that 12:30 is really the median of this easy pace. It really means nothing for you. It's just the middle of your pace range. And I use that number as an algorithm to calculate the far right side of basically the totals for the far right side of your schedule. So you can ignore the 12:30. It's just the middle of that range. But then you'll see marathon race pace, HMRP half marathon race pace, threshold pace, interval, and repetition. And it's from that VDOT app that I've created these different paces. Now, is the VDOT app completely accurate? No way in hell. It's not completely accurate at all. In fact, all of you will probably find, my half marathon race pace or my interval level don't quite match up to my marathon race pace. It's not quite perfect, but it's kind of almost sort of there. And it does give us the ability. Here's a different VDOT on this side. Same thing, the left margin of your schedule. it does sort of give us an ability to figure out what group and paces that someone can run with. Threshold, you're breathing really hard. Aerobic, easy. You're not breathing hard at all. You're conversational. You're really comfortable. That's why the term is easy. Interval repetition, you're really not saying more than a word or two. Repetition pace, you're going, yeah, I'm good. That's about it. Interval, maybe a few more words. Yeah, I'm good. Um, Threshold, you're breathing pretty hard as well. So there's that. I'm not going to get into the VDOT thing for long, except just in the book. This is the book. It does show your mile pace, your 5K pace, your 10K pace, your half marathon pace, your marathon pace, and they all and then your VDOT over in this column. But they all do kind of sort of almost align, but they may be off a little bit. So please be aware of that. I'm not going to go into this any farther. We're going to skip over all that. If any of you have any questions about VDOT or can't find the VDOT app, send me an email and we'll talk about it. Basically, you do not, rules for coaching and creating schedules. You do not want to do more than 10 to 15% more in a single week. And new this year, the schedules that you get from me, which are going to come out to all of you individually soon, have an algorithm that will clearly show you how much of a percentage increase your volume increases each week. And you'll note none of them increase more than 10%. The slower schedules, I don't even want to call them slower schedules. That's not appropriate. The schedules for people that have less intensity, and I'll explain that later. Those schedules build with even less a percentage, I found, and the faster runners, the more intense runners, build with a little higher intensity. Even they are below 10%. I already covered this about Meb Kavleski and Dina Castor and all that. I did hear Jack Daniels honestly say, he started a lecture to a bunch of coaches, an auditorium filled with coaches, and he said, so why do you guys have them do 20-mile runs anyway? And the point being is, it's not about a 20-mile run, it's not about a long run, it's about the volume that you do. And he is probably one of the more competent endurance coaches. He coached Ryan Hall, who set the male U.S. Marathon and half marathon record. I'm not sure about half marathon. I don't recall. Ryan Hall, Sarah Hall's husband, he coached him for a while. At any rate, minerals. Minerals are critical for neurological function. You need sodium also to absorb hydration, which I'm pouring myself more water. You need hydration. You need sodium to absorb that hydration. You've all heard, don't drink too much, because you do, don't drink too much. This is the theory I hear. Don't drink too much because you will deplete your mineral resources like sodium and potassium. Well, here's the thinking. You need hydration desperately. You need water desperately to replenish liquid in your blood, in the fascia that moisturize your muscle tissue, to keep your muscles fluid, right? You need liquid. So depleting your liquid is going to deplete your energy output and your ability to move fast. So not taking in as much hydration is a really bad idea. Instead, since you will deplete sodium and potassium and all that stuff, why don't you just take in sodium and potassium and all that stuff? I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's like you're depleting carbohydrate because of running. No one ever said don't run because you'll deplete carbohydrate. They just say take in carbohydrate. We know we need to eat during a marathon. You know, we know now we need to take in minerals because we deplete them, especially. We sweat them out. That white stuff on your face, on your arms, on your chest, on your shirt. If you're wearing a black shirt especially, you have these white lines. It's salt. It's sodium. It's minerals. We sweat it out like crazy. So please don't not drink because you're going to deplete more minerals. Yes, you flush minerals into your urine when you drink, but we need hydration desperately. We also need minerals. So, by the way, in case you're wondering, and probably few of you were, sodium, potassium, and calcium are called electrolytes, and they're the signal, you know, your nerve and your muscle are called the motor nerve. The combination nerve and muscle are called the motor nerve. And the signal, the communication that your motor nerve utilizes are sent in the form of sodium and potassium. And at the end of the nerve, before the muscle, to get the sodium and potassium into the muscle, to continue that signal to the muscle, to fire that ATP, that explosion, you need calcium. Calcium, yes, this is the same calcium that's in your bones. Well, calcium chloride is what's in your bones. But calcium flushes into the nerve end, which is kind of like this salt shaker kind of thing. At the end of the nerve end, it gets filled with calcium. The calcium is the depository that opens, this is very simplistic, it opens the nerve end and allows sodium and potassium to enter the muscle, the electrolytes to enter the muscle. So that's why all these different minerals do different things on a neurological level, and you need them. And yes, you know, you may, I confess, when I'm running a marathon, I look like a drug addict running down the street popping pills because, you know, especially on a hot day, even I remember reading about 10 years ago, the guy who invented Gatorade Endurance said, we cannot put enough sodium in Gatorade Endurance to compensate for the amount of sweat and sodium loss you have from just Gatorade alone. So on a hot day, especially if it gets up into the 80s, you need things like mineral pills. So there is that to be considered, especially if it's going up into becoming a hot day. So consider your mineral intake as well as your carbohydrate intake. So there you go. We've already discussed carbs, fats, and proteins and all that. Protein, of course, is to rebuild muscle tissue. Hyponatremia is when you've depleted sodium resources so much that your body, again, you need sodium to absorb. Yes, you need it to create that neurological impulse from the motor nerve, but sodium does a lot of things. You also need sodium to absorb hydration. If if you're sodium depleted, you're not going to be capable of absorbing hydration. So your blood levels are going to diminish, so your heart rate is going to be higher. If your heart rate is higher because your blood levels are smaller, your heart obviously is working harder, so your heart levels are higher because you're pumping more times to get less blood around your body. So, you know, if you don't have enough sodium, you're not going to be absorbing enough hydration. So your blood levels are going to diminish, which is obviously raising your heart rate and causing you to use more glycogen. All problems, you know, you can see where people get into trouble on a marathon. Hyponatremia is where your sodium levels are so low, at some level, you're no longer using sodium or excuse me, you're no longer hydrating your body. With total hyponatremia, your body can no longer absorb hydration. Now, this is a scary idea. If you're taking in water and you're feeling, you know, if you're taking in water and you're not able to absorb water and you're totally dehydrated already and you're not able to absorb water because you don't have enough sodium, this is a dangerous thing. Your heart rate is working harder. Get the point? This is another reason we want to take in mineral pills, or you do have sodium, potassium in gels. You have sodium, potassium in Nuun. I shouldn't talk about Gatorade. Nuun, I think, is a better product than Gatorade. I cannot consume personally. I cannot consume Gatorade. You will never hear me say good things about Gatorade. I do say good things about Nuun, which will be on the course again this year. But so all together combined, mineral pills, whatever, even on a hot day, you can get in enough minerals to get through a marathon, have enough sodium to absorb hydration. But be forewarned of hyponatremia. If you're getting people at the end of a run who are feeling lightheaded and dizzy, maybe they're getting water sloshing in their stomach, maybe their hands are starting to feel heavy or kind of numb. They may be having symptoms of hyponatremia. They need sodium. I remember there was a woman, we had lunch right after a run. They had me at a Roadrunner group run. I think it was like group 8 one year. And I kind of sat in with them, and there was a woman with her head on the table, just, you know, with her head on her arm on the table, and she just looked horrible. And I asked her about her feelings. She was nauseous. She had water juggling in her stomach. She had all the symptoms of hyponatremia. I said, somebody take some salt, pour it into a half a glass of water, and they did. And I said, drink this. And like that, this woman perked up and she felt perfect. No problem at all. She was just in a state of hyponatremia. I mean, it was like she had the flu and it went away right like that as soon as she got in sodium. So beware of that. Homeostasis, this is the big sucky of all endurance athletics. Homeostasis, your body wants to take you back to couch potato level because it has to feed all those extra muscles, and it doesn't want to engage them because of over 2 to 3 million years of human evolution. We have not had a Trader Joe's. Now that we have supermarkets, we don't really have to worry about food. But there is this thing that we in Southern California do not ever experience called snow, where all our crops died off, and we had to survive a winter for 2 to 3 billions of years of human evolution. So our bodies are seasonal, and our bodies want to take us back to a point where the wintertime where we may not have a lot of food. We may only have a few potatoes to get us through the wintertime to survive. And we survive because of this concept of homeostasis, where our ability levels, our capillary veins and arteries close up, our mitochondria get fewer and smaller, our oxidative enzymes become less. All of these aerobic things that help us utilize fat, all of these things that help us consume more calories, diminish. So when you're not training, everything just drops. And that's the big sucky of endurance athletics. You do need to take a break. You do need some time off to allow some homeostasis to take place, some of your body's efficiency, your fitness to drop, just because you don't want to stay up there too long, or you have greater risk of injury. Remember that graph, diminishing returns and increased setbacks. So you do want some time off. Allow your central nervous system to relax. You do need time off, or way increase in injury risk. But that's what homeostasis is. We're almost done. We're right on time. If somebody walks up to you and says, God, I'm really nervous, you can say good. Because they find if you're really like bored, lethargic, low heart rate, this side of the heart rate, nervous spectrum, or hyperactive, overwhelmed, fearful, like panic-stricken, if you're that side, you'll have less energy levels on output. But a little nervous is a really good thing. You'll have much more energy on race day. And for those people who say, God, I'm a little nervous, they will have more energy on race day. That's a good thing. And it just means that this is something that means something of importance to them. And I find when you remind them of this idea, well, it obviously means something of importance to you. They'll, oh yeah, that's why I'm nervous. And that's a good thing. So, okay, enough of psychology. Rules for pace leading. Always start with a question. And I'm almost done with all of this. We'll just breeze through this really quick, and then we'll get into our pace leader session in about 10 minutes. Always start with a question. Here's a prime example. Let me ask you this. If someone came up to you with a pain on the side of their foot, right below that little bone that sticks out of the outside of their foot, what would you tell them? Anyone? Answer. What would you tell them? Any suggestions? All right. I will tell you what I used to say, and that's that, oh, well, check in with your shoe store. Maybe you need a good different shoe. Well, then the person comes back, and they tried different shoes, and they still have the same pain. I was with an exercise physiologist one day, and she had someone come up to her and say, I have this pain right underneath my calcaneus bone. Oh, well, this bone on the side of your foot. That's your calcaneus bone. And the exercise physiologist, master degree, said, well, are you tight in your hips? And she said, well, yeah, but it's my foot. She was kind of baffled by this. And she said, yeah, I always start with the hips and work my way down. And she said, are you tight in your hips? And she said, yeah, my hips are really tight. And she said, well, you have this IT band on the side that pulls down from your hips. You ever get pain in the side of your knee? No, not anymore, but I did in the past. Okay. Did you ever get pain kind of in your calf, on the side of your calf? Do you have tight calf muscles? Yeah, I used to get pain like in my shins on the side there, but I don't anymore. It's on my side of my foot. And she said, well, draw a line from the hip to the knee to the outside of your foot. And she said, there's your issue. It starts with your hips. You need to stretch out your hips. You need to stretch out your calf all the way down. Your hips will stretch out the IT band on the side of your thigh all the way down. Woman came back, no problem. Problem solved. So don't, the person asking the question may not know what the question is. The real question is, do you have hip tightness? That was the real question. So if you just give an answer like I did 20 years ago, oh, check out your shoe store, it may not address what the real question is. Even the person asking the question may not know the real answer. And my next slide, I've always said, whoops, oh, we're getting into this stuff. Well, hang on. I've always said, in another slide, I've always said, a good coach knows all the answers immediately. A great coach knows no answers, but a lot of great questions. For pace leading, look over your shoulder and make sure somebody is there. I know that sounds really stupid. One race, I had been injured that year. I was pace leading, and I had two other pace leaders, and I knew I'd get them to mile 16 and I'd burn out. And I did, because my threshold was lower, and I knew about mile 16 I would be done. I'd be using too much glycogen too quickly, and I did. And I took in like 2,000 calories. It was a ridiculous amount. I still burned out. And so the other two pace leaders started up, and no one was with them. They were kind of slowing down with me. And they went the rest of the marathon with no one behind them. And they all were like kind of huddled, not knowing what to do. And had the pace leaders turned around and said, hey, you guys, they would have had a big mob with them. And I mean a big mob. So always look over your shoulder, make sure somebody's there, and see how they're doing and listen to them breathing. That's the next point. You have 80, 90 minutes of glycogen until you burn out, you crash hit the wall, you die, whatever you want to call it. Make sure they're not breathing too hard early on in the race, or even at the Rose Bowl Half or LA Marathon. If they're not in your training program, you may recommend to them that they need to slow down. Be careful of the uphill. And this is how I used to get a big crowd with me, especially at the Rose Bowl Half. There's early uphills, that first uphill, going underneath that bridge. I'd say to people, slow down on the uphill, listen to your breathing. You may want to stay with us. Don't go too fast or you'll burn out this early. And they just suddenly huddled around us. And I had a big mob with me. The wedge, if you have a big group, I found the first year I had pace led, I lost half the group before we got to the starting line. And what I did is I got everybody in a group of twos, and it sounded a little too militaristic, but I got everybody in a group of twos, and one person followed the other, and they didn't have to follow the front of the group, and no one could get in between, which is why people got separated and couldn't find the group. So I use what I call the wedge, column of twos. It goes right through the crowd, and it works for the first few miles until things deplete a little and you're not in a mob at the starting line. Works great. Get everybody in a column of twos who want to run with you. Just recommend it. If they don't want to do that, that's fine. They do want to do that, you could recommend that. That's how they will best be able to get to the starting line and not lose you. I've always said the one-size-fits-all schedule does not fit all, and the one-size-fits-all schedule needs to change as there needs to change. If you get sickness, if we have these percentages of intensity for different schedules. The walkers have 5% intensity levels. The groups 5 through 10. Keep in mind our numbers are a little different this year. We added a few pace groups because we're going by finish time. But groups 5 through 10 have 20% of high intensity work. Groups 1 through 4 have 15%, similar to pro athletes, but their volume is so much more that their actual numbers of high intensity work are more than groups 5 through 10. But that's how I created the schedules based on intensity. Different people have different needs. I had a 71-year-old, and I said to her, if we can just get you to the starting line uninjured, you'll win your age group. And very thin, petite athlete. And I gave her the 5%, the walking schedule. Essentially, it was an individualized schedule for her, but it was essentially our walking schedule. And because it is such less intensity. And if you find an older runner running in group 6, if they break down, they say to you, I can't do speed work, whatever, give them the walking schedule. Recommend that. The weekend runs for group 5 through walkers is the same distance on Saturdays with your group on schedule for group 5 to walkers. Same distance. I recommend they do the 5% schedule, the walking schedule. So that's all of that. Tapers you need, I started to talk about this. I'm going to zip through this. We don't have a lot of time. You need periods of, which is what we call periodization training. Periods where you build for a couple of weeks. This is a traditional older schedule. The older road runners, they kept building, and then you had your final schedule. Not as efficient. You develop hormone, you develop volume, and your hormone levels go down and down and down as your energy levels, your load increases. So you get more and more fatigued, you burn up muscle tissue, you lose hormones more and more as you go up and up and up in volume and do more and more. And therefore, that's why we have like 2 or 3 week build and 1 week taper, a 3 week build and 1 week taper. Each one of these is defined as a week. So there is that. And you can see this is a bigger schedule, 3 week build, 1 week. And with it, hormones are go in inverse. Hormones go the reverse, and I'm really almost done. The opposite of energy output. So during periods of taper, this is why you get stronger and more energy, is those weeks of taper. So make sure your people are doing those weeks of taper. And that's why I say do not look at where you are today and ask why. Look to the future and ask, and all the possibilities that lie therein, and say, why not? Because your fitness levels increase. And train smart and train to win, because if you don't, you won't. And if you do, you just might. I thank you, and I'll see you all at the finish line. And now let's have our pace leader discussion.
David, did you have anything to add on that? I'm sorry, like I took up the room.
No, Almi says hello. She's going to maybe join us for 2 seconds and say hi. But I did want to suggest something to all of you, and that's that try as best you can to avoid using command words like should, ought to, got to, must. I remember the Roadrunners in the old days, we used to hear coaches, there are a couple of volunteer coaches, and they would always say, you got to do your midweek runs. You got to do your midweek runs. You should be doing your midweek runs. And words like should, ought to, got to, must, try and avoid using those because they kind of get people frustrated. Remember when your mom told you should have done your homework, you know?
They should drink water.
Yeah. I try avoid using words like should, ought to, got to, must, and focus again instead on goal setting. Like, always ask questions. Always, don't answer a question or a statement with an answer with a question, and ask, what are your goals? What is it you want to achieve? Because if you're not doing your midweek runs, you'll never achieve what you could possibly be achieving on a marathon. So always start with a question and don't try and avoid words like should, ought to, got to, must.
So you
Instead-
should listen to David. And
Yeah.
I just want to wrap up that conversation though. I mean, I love your passion and I love that there's so much experience in this room and way more than I have and way more history in this room than I have. I saw the LA Roadrunners in a really bizarre period of, 2021, 2022 craziness. And so I would like to just, ask it, like, I do want to have this conversation. I did not realize how passionate you guys were about marketing and outreach. And so now I know. And so I will, like I said, I will send out a sort of an open-ended survey, and then we'll get it onto it to talk about it. If you're interested or not. If you don't care and you're like, hey, just tell me where to run, then we can. Yeah. But if you're interested in being part of that conversation.
That's it. I'm done. Thank you for allowing me, all of you, to be the face on the wall. I've enjoyed being
Still
the
hard to
face
get
on the
pictures.
wall.
Feel better. I know.
Are we gonna be though, or are we gonna be? If we get down, is it problematic at the table? Oh my God.
Okay. Hey, looking right here at me, and what my name's Cheese. Noon.
Wait. Look at each other. Don't look at the camera. Look at each other.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
COVID. Say
That's hilarious. Thank you.
Are they-
Forward when you stand up.
Yeah, forward.
All right, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
I didn't know there was so much passion about marketing.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.